He raised his hand because his mother said something. But when my bag hit the ground, what spilled out made them both go silent. Because it wasn't just a piece of paper. It was proof that I had never been the fool they thought I was. Please subscribe, comment, and tell us where you're watching from. If you've ever had to face betrayal from those closest to you, you're not alone. Her name was Emily Bennett, a 29-year-old primary school teacher known for her soft smile, gentle voice, and unshakable loyalty to the people she loved. She had chestnut hair she always wore in a neat low bun, kind gray eyes that hid storms beneath their calm surface, and a heart that believed love was something you worked for, even if you were the only one trying. She had been married to Daniel Carter for 3 years, a man she once believed would be her greatest partner. But somewhere along the way, Daniel had stopped being her teammate and started becoming his mother's puppet. And on that rainy Friday evening, the woman they underestimated, the one who always stayed silent, was about to surprise them both. Emily walked into the Carter family home, her arms full with shopping bags, one carrying fresh scones and strawberries for her mother-in-law, the other with a small gift for her nephew's birthday. She was exhausted. Her knees ached from a long day of teaching, her shoulders tight with stress, and her heart heavy from weeks of unspoken tension. Daniel had changed. Distant, short-tempered, and increasingly, his decisions were dictated by his mother, Margaret Carter, the self-appointed queen of everything. As Emily stepped into the lounge, Margaret was already perched on the floral sofa like royalty, a teacup in hand and disapproval written all over her face. Daniel sat across from her, scrolling absently on his phone. "You're late," Margaret sniffed without looking up. Emily offered a small smile. "Traffic was dreadful, and I stopped to pick up a cake for Ben's birthday." Margaret gave a sharp exhale. "I told you she always has an excuse," she muttered to Daniel. "Always late. Always frazzled. I don't know what you see in her." Daniel didn't even look at Emily. Emily placed the groceries in the kitchen and heard them talking, just quiet enough that they thought she couldn't hear. But she did. "I saw her again, Dan." On the phone, whispering in the hallway. "I'm telling you, she's hiding something." A pause. Then Daniel's voice, uncertain. "Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure. She's not as innocent as she looks. She's been to the bank again. Mark my words, she's got secrets." Emily stepped back into the lounge. "Daniel," she said softly, "can we talk for a moment?" He stood up suddenly, and before she could say another word, he slapped her. The sound rang through the room like glass shattering. Emily's bags hit the floor. Fruit scattered across the carpet. The gift bag tipped over, and from her handbag, a white folder slid out and burst open. Daniel stared at it. Margaret leaned forward. Several documents fluttered onto the floor. Daniel picked up the top page. A property deed. Emily's name. A 2-bedroom flat in Surrey. Paid in full. Purchased 3 months ago. He grabbed another sheet, a solicitor's letter confirming ownership. Then another, a job offer from an international school. A visa application. A resignation letter dated for the following week. Margaret's mouth fell open. Daniel stared at his wife. "You were leaving?" Emily stood there, one hand on her cheek, voice calm and steady. "Yes." Silence. Daniel blinked. Margaret was frozen, for once without a single nasty word to spit out. Emily took a breath. "I never needed your money, or your approval. I stayed because I believed in this marriage. But when your mother whispered lies and you chose to hit me without asking for the truth." She stepped forward. "You lost the right to my silence." Daniel opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Emily bent down, collected the folder, and calmly picked up her belongings. "You raised your hand once," she said, turning to face them both. "But I've been raising myself every day for the past 3 years." She walked to the door. "And I'll never lower myself again." And just like that, she left, out of the house, out of their shadow, and into the life she had been quietly building all along. The door shut behind Emily with a gentle click. No chasing footsteps. No gasps of regret. No apologies. Just the final sound of someone deciding to choose peace, even if it meant walking away from everything. She stood on the pavement, the folder held tightly to her chest. Her cheek still burned from the slap, but the ache inside her chest was far deeper. She hadn't cried yet. She wouldn't. Not here. Not in front of them. A neighbor across the road peeked out behind lace curtains. Emily tugged her coat tighter and walked down the drive. Not rushed. Not panicked. Just free. She had planned her departure quietly over months. The job offer. The flat. The paperwork. But never in her wildest imaginings did she think she'd be forced to reveal it like this, mid-accusation, mid-attack. She hadn't planned on being slapped. But perhaps fate had forced her hand. Emily arrived at the guest house she had booked under her maiden name. Quiet, tucked away near the school she'd be joining in 2 weeks' time. No frills, just a bed, a kettle, and peace. The manager gave her a kind smile, handed over the key, and asked no questions. Emily climbed the narrow stairs, entered the room, and finally let her knees give way. She sank to the floor, folders still clutched tight. And for the first time in years, she let herself cry. Not because she missed him, but because she had let herself believe, for too long, that love meant sacrifice. That endurance was noble. That silence was strength. She cried for the woman who used to smile through everything. The woman who adjusted, apologized, accommodated. Then, slowly, she wiped her tears. That version of Emily was gone. And she wasn't mourning her anymore. She was burying her. Meanwhile, back at the Carter home, Daniel hadn't moved. He sat on the edge of the sofa, staring at the crumpled documents now lying in a heap on the coffee table. Margaret bustled about in her dressing gown, fuming. How dare she hide all this from you? How selfish, how manipulative. Buying property behind her back. Taking a job abroad? That woman's a disgrace. Daniel didn't respond. He picked up one of the letters again, the one with Emily's new job offer from the international school in York. Did you know she was planning this? He asked quietly. Margaret scoffed. Of course not. You know I don't snoop through handbags. But the way her voice wobbled, Daniel knew she was lying. And suddenly, painfully, he realized something. He didn't actually know who had betrayed him more. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat awake, the slap echoing over and over in his mind. The expression on Emily's face, not shocked, not afraid, just disappointed. The way she didn't scream, didn't fight, just let the truth speak for itself. For the first time in his life, Daniel realized that silence could be louder than any argument. Emily, meanwhile, spent her evening in the quiet company of hot tea and her own thoughts. No footsteps in the hall. No biting comments. No eggshells to walk on. The room was small, but it was hers. For once, she felt safe. And strangely whole. By morning, 3 missed calls. All from Daniel. No messages. She stared at the screen, then powered off the phone. Later that week, Emily met her new head teacher, a kind woman named Helen who greeted her with open arms and a cup of strong Yorkshire tea. We're lucky to have you, she said. The children are going to adore you. Emily smiled. Not the strained smile she used at family dinners. A real smile. Because this time, no one had handed her this life. She had built it. Quietly. Carefully. Powerfully. Back in their village, Margaret was crumbling. She had tried calling Emily's mother to stir guilt. She just walked out. No goodbye, no explanation. But Mrs. Bennett was no longer the timid woman Margaret had bullied years ago. Your son raised his hand, she replied sharply. And you taught him that was acceptable. How dare you speak to me like that? No, she replied calmly. How dare you? Click. Days turned into a week. Then 2. Emily remained unreachable. Daniel spiraled, sleeping on the sofa, ignoring work calls, barely eating. Margaret's voice, once so commanding, had become nothing more than a background drone. He started to see things clearly. He remembered how Emily would gently smooth over the silence at dinner. How she made the house feel like a home. How she never once raised her voice, even when his mother did. And how, even now, she hadn't tried to hurt him. She had just left. with dignity. And that, somehow, stung more than any retaliation ever could. On a rainy Thursday, Chloe, Daniel's sister, called Emily from a new number. "Emily, it's Chloe. Daniel's not well. He's not eating. He just sits in the lounge staring at your old books." Emily paused. "I'm sorry to hear that," she said. "But I'm not responsible for how he reacts to his own choices." Chloe was silent for a moment. "Did you always plan to leave?" "No," Emily said. "I plan to stay. But I also plan to survive." Click. Because sometimes survival isn't dramatic. It's quiet. It's steady. It's finally knowing that walking away isn't giving up. It's waking up. And once you've woken up, you never go back to sleep. Daniel Carter sat on the living room sofa, still in yesterday's clothes, staring at the framed photo on the mantelpiece. It was from last Christmas. Emily had arranged everything, from the roast to the decorations to his mother's seat at the head of the table. She had even bought Margaret a cashmere scarf and made her favorite trifle. Now, he couldn't remember the last time he'd said thank you. He just remembered the sound of the slap, the way Emily's bag hit the floor, and the folder that had been more powerful than any shouting match could have been. Margaret bustled in, holding a steaming mug. "Drink this," she said curtly, setting it on the coffee table. "You can't mope forever, Daniel. You're making this bigger than it is. She'll come crawling back." Daniel didn't even look at her. "She's not coming back." Margaret folded her arms. "Oh, stop it. You're making her out to be some kind of saint. She deceived you." "No," he said quietly. "She prepared for a future. I just didn't see it because I was too busy listening to you." Margaret's face went pale. "You don't mean that." "I do." He picked up the scarf from the photo, the one Emily had given his mum last Christmas, and dropped it in the bin. 2 days later, word started getting around. Emily Bennett hadn't just walked out of her marriage. She had been offered a lead teaching position at one of the top international academies in York, a post only given to the best. Parents at her old school gossiped about it in WhatsApp groups. She was so quiet. I had no idea she was that accomplished. Apparently she bought her own place last year, cash. Well, she always did seem too clever for Daniel, didn't she? Margaret hated it, but she couldn't silence it, because for once, she wasn't in control of the narrative. At her new school, Emily flourished. Children responded to her warmth. Her colleagues respected her. And Helen, the head teacher, took her under her wing like an older sister. "You've got something rare, Emily," she said one afternoon after class. "A quiet strength. I hope you realize that's far more powerful than people think." Emily smiled. "I didn't used to believe that." Helen nodded. "And now?" "I do. Because silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it means you're done explaining yourself." One Friday, Emily received a brown envelope in the post. She opened it cautiously. Inside, divorce papers. No note. Just the forms. Filed by Daniel. Her breath caught, not out of sorrow, but relief. She had braced herself for begging, drama, guilt. But this meant he had finally accepted it was over. She took a pen from the drawer. And signed. No hesitation. No tears. Just one clean, determined signature. The following weekend, Emily took herself to a cafe near her flat, a place she'd passed for months, but never visited. She sat alone by the window with a pot of tea, her book, and a croissant. A group of young women nearby were whispering. She recognized one of them, a parent from her old school. Their eyes met. They smiled. One leaned over. "Emily Bennett?" "Yes. We heard about everything. And I just wanted to say, well, good for you." Emily blinked. "Honestly," the woman added, "you're kind of an inspiration right now. A lot of us wouldn't have had the courage." Emily didn't know what to say, so she smiled. "Thank you." Back in Surrey, Daniel walked into his mother's kitchen and found her on the phone. He heard her say Emily's name, followed by, "Well, she thinks she's clever, but..." He didn't let her finish. "Mum," he said, his voice hard. Margaret looked up. "Don't speak about her again." She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" I said, stop talking about her. Margaret scoffed. You're still defending her? After she walked out? She didn't walk out. She escaped. And then he walked out too. Out of her house. Out of her control. Maybe for the first time ever. That evening, Chloe messaged Emily. Just so you know, Mom's losing her grip. Daniel's finally seen through her. Emily read it and put the phone down. She didn't need updates because the past was behind her, and what lay ahead, that was hers to shape now. She hung a painting above her fireplace that weekend, her own artwork. It was simple, a woman walking through a storm, but her back was straight, and the sky was starting to clear. She stared at it for a long moment, then whispered, "You made it." The invitation came tucked inside a white envelope, hand-delivered to her new flat. Elegant script on thick card, celebrating the retirement of Mr. Peter Langford. Dinner at the Colston Club. Emily stared at it for a long time. She had worked under Mr. Langford during her early teaching years, long before she married Daniel. The Colston Club was the sort of place people whispered about. All cutlery and crystal, old money formality wrapped in linen and pride. She hadn't expected to be invited. But clearly, someone remembered her. Clearly, someone knew she didn't belong in the shadows anymore. She wore navy blue, not black. Fitted, not tight. Understated, not invisible. Her hair was swept into a soft chignon, her earrings simple pearls, and around her wrist, a silver bracelet her grandmother once called a quiet rebellion. She walked through the entrance of the Colston Club and was instantly met with a swirl of conversation, champagne flutes, and camera flashes. She didn't flinch. It didn't take long. She spotted them, at a table near the center of the room. Daniel. And Margaret. She'd forgotten how theatrical Margaret's presence could be. She was dressed like the mother of the groom. Large hat, layered pearls, as if this night were hers. Daniel looked tired. He hadn't aged so much as sunk. His face held the kind of heaviness guilt leaves behind. Emily didn't walk past them. Didn't nod. Didn't shrink. She let the host lead her to her own seat, at the head table, 2 seats down from Mr. Langford himself. Daniel noticed. Margaret definitely noticed. Her lips tightened so hard they nearly vanished. As the meal began, chatter surrounded her. People asked about her new role. How's the school in York? Did I hear you're mentoring the new teaching cohort? Didn't you recently buy a flat near Regent's Park? Emily answered gently, honestly, without embellishment, and with zero interest in showing off. Because when you're finally free, you don't need to announce it. It speaks for itself. Midway through dinner, Mr. Langford stood to make a speech. He thanked old colleagues, shared memories, laughed at past mishaps. And then, to Emily's surprise, he looked directly at her. There are many gifted people I've worked with, he said, but some shine quietly. They don't demand the spotlight. They simply light the room. One of those people is here tonight. He raised his glass. To Emily Bennett, for rising with grace, even when many would have broken. The table applauded. The room turned toward her. And for a moment, all she could do was breathe. She smiled, nodded politely. Daniel's fork stopped halfway to his mouth. Margaret looked like someone had slapped her. Later, as people mingled near the dessert tables, Daniel approached. He stopped a respectful distance away. Emily, he said softly, you look well. She turned to him. Calm. Neutral. I wanted to apologize. For what I did. For not seeing things clearly. She tilted her head slightly. It wasn't that you didn't see. It's that you didn't want to. He swallowed. I know. A beat. Then he added, I still think about that night. What fell out of your bag. I keep wondering how long you'd been preparing. Emily looked him dead in the eyes. Long enough to realize I deserved more. And she walked away. Chloe found her later. I nearly laughed when Mum saw you at the head table, she whispered. She kept saying, they must have made a mistake. Emily chuckled. Let her think that. Why? Because people like her never admit what's obvious, even when it's right in front of them. That night, as Emily left the Colston Club, she passed Margaret in the foyer. The older woman didn't say a word. She just looked at Emily, really looked, and for the first time seemed unsure of herself. Emily didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't speak. She simply nodded, the same way a queen nods to a losing opponent across the battlefield. Because the thing about dignity, you never have to raise your voice. You just have to rise. Emily stood at the tall window of her flat, the winter sun brushing against her shoulders as she stirred her tea. Below, the street bustled, children with backpacks, shopkeepers unlocking doors, a man walking his terrier in the same loop he always did. The world kept moving, but hers was finally still. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like a background character in someone else's life. She was her own headline. The envelope came in the second post that day. Stiff white paper, gold seal, a ribbon she untied gently. Inside was a letter, an award nomination. The Rowan Initiative for Educational Leadership had shortlisted her for their silent strength recognition for educators who had quietly transformed not just classrooms, but communities. She blinked at the letter. They'd read about her work, heard about how she'd rebuilt a school curriculum from scratch, watched her calmly mentor new teachers through storms without ever raising her voice. They didn't mention Daniel, didn't mention Margaret, didn't care about gossip. Only her name was on the letter. And for Emily, that was everything. That weekend, she was invited to speak on a panel at a regional education conference. She arrived early, her notes tucked neatly into a leather-bound folder, the very same one Daniel had seen fall from her bag the night she left. She still carried it, not because of what spilled out that night, but because of what it symbolized. Preparedness, independence, a life designed, not begged for. She was the final speaker, and when she stepped up to the podium, there was a hush. She looked out across the room, rows of teachers, administrators, parents. And she began. I used to think that being quiet made me weak, that keeping peace meant giving in, that biting my tongue was nobler than defending my truth. But silence is only noble when it's a choice, not a cage. And the moment I stopped asking permission to exist, everything changed. Applause broke out. Warm, full, real. And in that room, her voice finally landed where it had always belonged. Not just heard, but respected. That evening, she received a text from an unknown number. Saw your panel talk. Never imagined you'd be the one up there. I suppose I never really knew you. D. She stared at it, then deleted it. No need to archive ghosts. The next day, a young teacher from her new school pulled her aside. I watched your talk online, she said, eyes wide. You made me believe I don't have to become someone else to be respected. Emily smiled. You don't. The girl hesitated. But how did you rebuild? After it all? Emily looked out the window, then back. One brick at a time. And I stopped asking if I was allowed to. Meanwhile, in the Carter household, Margaret sat in silence. The dining table was empty, the lights slightly dimmed. No one called anymore. No one came for tea. Daniel had moved into a small flat near the town center. He rarely visited. Chloe had stopped defending her mother altogether. Margaret turned on the television and, by accident, flicked to a local news channel. There, in the scrolling headline, Emily Bennett nominated for National Leadership Award. Margaret froze. It was one thing to lose control. It was another to watch the woman she tried to break become someone people admired, someone people looked up to. She muted the television and sat in silence. The real kind this time. The kind no one returns from. Later that week, Emily visited a local bookstore to sign a contract. She'd been asked to contribute a chapter to a book about resilience in education. She passed a charity shop on the way back. And stopped. In the window, she saw a handbag. Same shade, same stitching, identical to the one she had the night she left. She stepped inside, picked it up, ran her hand over the leather, then gently put it down, because she didn't need to carry symbols anymore. She was the symbol now. It was supposed to be a short feature, a side piece in the Sunday section of the Yorkshire Voice, spotlighting outstanding educators in the region. Emily almost said no. She didn't care for publicity. Didn't need to be in magazines. She was already at peace. But Helen, her head teacher, had looked at her and said, "It's not just your success, Emily. It's your story. People need to hear how dignity wins." So she agreed. The interview was set in a cozy cafe, nothing flashy, just her favorite local spot with the mismatched chairs and lemon drizzle cake she swore was made by angels. The journalist, a woman named Anna, was kind, warm, curious, without being invasive. They spoke about teaching, about burnout, about recovery. And then, gently, Anna asked, "Can I ask about your former marriage?" "Only if you're comfortable." Emily paused, then nodded. She didn't share everything. Not the slap, not the whisper, not the sting of betrayal. But she did say this: "I was with someone who didn't see me, and whose mother spent years convincing him that I was small. Eventually, I stopped trying to grow around their limitations. I grew anyway, just elsewhere." Anna blinked. "May I quote that?" Emily smiled. "You may." The article ran a week later. The headline read, "The woman who walked out quietly and came back louder than ever." It went viral, not for the drama, but for the strength. People shared it on LinkedIn, on parenting blogs, on teacher forums. The quote became a poster in a women's shelter. It was read out at a university graduation speech. Emily received over 300 emails from women, young and old, who said the same thing. "Thank you for reminding me I don't have to shrink." One message stood out, from a woman named Abigail who wrote, "My fiancé's mother is trying to control our wedding. I've been scared to speak up. Then I read your story. Yesterday, I told them I won't be bullied. Thank you." Emily sat with that one for a long time. Meanwhile, Daniel saw the article. It was sent to him by 3 different people, none of them family. One was a colleague who added, "Mate, is this your Emily?" He didn't respond. He read it twice, then a third time. Every sentence felt like a weight on his chest, not because it was angry, but because it wasn't. She hadn't insulted him, hadn't aired their dirty laundry, hadn't exposed the night he hit her. She'd simply outgrown the room they'd built together. And she hadn't looked back. At a charity gala weeks later, Margaret Carter tried to speak up. She was seated next to a woman who turned and said, "You're Daniel's mother, right? The one from Emily Bennett's story." Margaret tried to brush it off with a smug grin, but the woman added, "How on earth did you let someone like her slip away?" Margaret couldn't speak. She just folded her napkin and excused herself early. Emily didn't hear about it. She didn't need to, because she was busy signing a contract with a national teaching trust to design mentorship programs for under-resourced schools. Not because it looked good, but because she wanted to. Because every time a woman was told she needed to be smaller, softer, quieter, Emily would make sure there was a ladder nearby. One she built herself. That night, she stood at her window again, watching the city hum. She wasn't lonely. She was full. And when her phone buzzed again, another text from Daniel, she didn't even read it this time. She blocked the number. Not out of anger, but peace. Because the only story she was reading now was her own. And it was just getting started. The event was called Voices of Change, a conference for women in leadership broadcast nationally. Emily hadn't applied, hadn't sought it out. They came to her. "We read your article," the organizer had said. "Your story has changed people. We'd be honored if you'd give the keynote speech." Emily hesitated at first. She wasn't a public speaker. She was a teacher, a writer, a listener. But Helen had reminded her, sometimes the quietest women need to stand on the loudest stages. And so she said yes. The venue was packed. Rows of chairs, velvet curtains, cameras stationed in every corner. Her name was printed on banners, her face on the program. She wore cream, not to stand out, but to glow. Not a crown, not revenge, just light. What she didn't know, what no one had told her, was that among the audience were 2 unexpected guests. Daniel Carter and Margaret. Chloe had invited them, quietly, without telling Emily. They needed to see what power actually looks like, she had said. So they sat 3 rows back unnoticed by most. watching, waiting. Emily stepped onto the stage. No script. Just a heartbeat that had once been broken and was now whole. She looked out over the crowd, lights hot on her face, silence pulsing through the air. Then she spoke. There was a time I thought strength looked like staying silent, like making myself small to fit someone else's mold, like sacrificing identity for the comfort of others. But one day, I chose myself, not out of rage, not out of spite, but because I finally realized I deserved peace without permission. The crowd leaned forward. I was told I wasn't enough. Too quiet, too soft, too polite. But they were wrong. I wasn't too little. They were simply too loud to hear the power in quiet resolve. In the audience, Margaret froze. For the first time, she saw Emily not as the quiet wife, but as a force. A woman who had outgrown the story they wrote for her. And Daniel? He looked down. Because he had heard every word before, in the silence Emily used to carry. He just hadn't listened. Emily closed her speech with this. If you're sitting in a place where you're made to feel small, build your own space. Don't shout to be heard. Rise so high, they have no choice but to look up. The crowd rose. Applause roared. And somewhere in the third row, Daniel stood too, not to clap, but to walk away. Because he finally understood. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the privilege of being part of her story. Later that evening, Emily sat alone backstage. The speech was done. The lights dimmed. And the quiet returned. But it wasn't empty. It was earned. She took out her phone and scrolled through the hundreds of messages pouring in. You gave me courage. I left an abusive relationship today. You made me feel seen. My daughter wants to be a teacher now because of you. She pressed a hand to her heart and whispered, thank you. Not to them, but to herself. To the version of Emily who had once walked out of a house in silence and now walked into rooms as if she built them. Epilogue 1 year later. Emily Bennett stood in front of a classroom full of young girls. On the board behind her, the words, voice, boundaries, worth. A little girl raised her hand. Miss Bennett, what if someone says you're not good enough? Emily smiled. Then you remind them, you weren't born to fit their story. You're here to write your own. And in her eyes, in all their eyes, shone the light of a woman who had been broken, silenced, doubted, but never defeated.